Welcome to Life in Full Expression with me, your host, Beth Wolfe. In this show, we will explore, elevate, expand, and learn how to live your best life. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to live your life in full expression or create an expansive vision for your future? Get ready to be energized to fully express yourself, discover your heart's clarity for dynamic direction in life decisions, and develop your unique capabilities so you are delivering your ever-increasing capacities into your world. Join me, Beth Wolfe, and unleash the limitless capabilities of your soul, experiencing amazement, collaboration, fun, and purpose. Life in Full Expression starts now. All right, well, welcome you guys to another episode of Life in Full Expression. I love that opener. We're here to explore, elevate, and expand. And I'd like you to give a warm welcome to our guest host today, Leah Thompson. Thanks for being in the house today.
Thank you for having me, Beth.
Oh, so excited. Today, Leah and I are going to have a really fun discussion the power of listening. As we were prepping for this, we were just, going over our own reminiscence of really not getting a lot of training in listening at all. And this is if you want to invest in yourself as far as developing a skill set that will help you both personal and professional, this is the one. It's a great game changer. Well, let me give you a little synopsis as to why you're here and what you're going to listen to and what Leah and I are going to talk about. Really, we're going to talk about what is good listening and what isn't good listening. I also want to give you to discover 4 basic goals of good listening and that really are going to set you apart from the average person. We're also going to introduce to you 2 of 6 powerful listening skills. And if you want to know more about that, I'm going to come in with that at the end of this session. So as you know, life in full expression in 7 dimensions. So we're going to tap into the occupational dimension as well as the social dimension today. And really, this is really about social, looking at the ability to interact effectively. In occupational, how can this elevate you in your work with all your relationships there? Well, without further ado, I would love, Leah, for you to start us off with this amazing quote you have from Winston Churchill. I think this is a great
Winston Churchill.
foundation.
Absolutely. I love this inspiring quote from Winston Churchill, and it's courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. And I just love the action of it being courageous, and it's an active, it leads into this active listening. That listening is not a passive thing to do as a human interacting with others. It is very active, and it requires the courage to sit back and let other people speak and let them finish their thoughts and to be present in that moment with them.
Yeah, I love that. Who knew that courage was not only for speaking but listening as well?
Yes.
This sums up our whole segment in all of that. I love what that says, and I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Have you ever taken a course on listening? Did you get any in high school, college?
You know what's ironic is in college, I took communications. In high school, there was even a communications part of my education. But not once in those communications did they have like a module or a focus on listening, which is 50% of communication. Like that literally is the biggest part of communication. And yet they taught us how to do public speaking. They taught us how to debate. They taught us how to put together good rhetoric, and to communicate and discuss and to project these great ideas and stand up and everything. Not once, though, did they sit and talk and teach us about listening. It wasn't until I was an adult and going through a continuing education program with my husband that I really heard about active listening.
Same. I'm exactly the same. Didn't even, wasn't even in the wheelhouse of any of my education, K through 12. It was more like, well, be polite, wait your turn kind of thing. But same thing when I was in university and took a communications course. Actually, my professor was blind.
Mm.
So I felt like I got a little bit more out of that communications class, but it was exactly what you just entailed. And also later in life, when I entered into um, Life Mastery Institute and really took on a 3-year coaching certification. But one area that I know has really enhanced me and my listening skills, and for our listeners out there right now, I had a 40-year degree, career in sports and occupational medicine. So it was vital that I was listening to patients when they would come to me with their injuries and what were their signs and symptoms. And you could learn more about the injury by what they were telling you verbally and the history. You would almost know what was wrong with them before you
Mm.
actually even started doing clinical testing.
Wow.
So that sharpened my listening as well.
Absolutely. And it's
Yeah.
not something we're born with. It's not something that we're really inherently, as I raised, an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, listening is not a skill that they are inherently born with. It is something you have to guide and teach and practice and practice and practice.
Hmm. There's a little bit of research. I like what you said about practice, that pretty much 70% of our waking time as adults is with communication, and 45% of that is listening, 30% speaking, 16% reading, 9% writing. So
Wow.
as you mentioned already, 45 to 50% is us listening, yet it's not really a virtue that a lot of us practice on a regular basis. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, just because we're doing it all the time doesn't mean that we have that skill. Just because you are listening 45% of the time doesn't mean that you have the um, engagement that comes with listening. Like it might
Mhm.
be more of like just I hear you, you know, you're listening on the surface, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's a little bit, if people that are not necessarily watching us right now, but as you're speaking, I'm doing a little bit of the bare minimum skills of listening, where I've got eye contact through the camera with you, and I'm nodding my head and I'm going mm-hmm, and those are bare minimum
Mhm.
in the realm of listening. It's not very active, but we're going to
Absolutely.
get into more of that. One thing that I wanted to bring up is that while we're sitting and listening to another person, there's something that you brought up I thought was really pretty cool. And as we're sitting there listening to someone, we may be thinking about what we want to say.
Right.
And you brought up a really cool perspective about that.
Well, just that as personally, I find myself like I know that when it comes to good listening, you're not supposed to be thinking about your answers. Like you're not a lot of the
Right.
times you're waiting for a moment to speak or to say something back. And for me it's because I have quite a bit of insecurity about what am I bringing to am I going to be saying something enlight
Enlightening.
yes.
There it is, girl.
Um, am I going to be speaking to it? Do I have a fun anecdote to share with this
Mhm.
conversation? And so I'm racking my brain thinking of how can I be interesting and how can I show up in this conversation? And that deprives me of actually being present and listening to that person speak. I think we all fall victim to this because we have insecurities about sounding unintelligent or not prepared or maybe some of us require a bit more time to think about the words or we don't come up with the words like enlightenment.
Right, right. And that's where, help from a friend. It works great.
Yes.
So, and you brought up a word in there that reminded me of a mentor that I listen to quite a bit, is David Metzler. And you used the word interesting, like if we stay in our insecurities and looking at, well, how can I add value to this conversation? He shared a very wonderful, simplistic statement. When you enter into a conversation, go there with the goal and the intention that you're more interested than interesting.
Yeah.
And it just takes off the pressure, because now you're coming into a conversation with the listening tools of curiosity and intrigue and finding
Hmm.
out more about the person and being interested in them. And that goes along with one of the uh, really a core value that I love to have in my life, is that when I come into a conversation with someone, that they really feel edified, they feel increased, and that as they leave that conversation, that they're uplifted because
Yeah,
of that time, and that they feel acknowledged and really just
absolutely.
valued in that. But I
Right,
thought,
because it can be easy to fall prey to sort of the stuff that you're taught to do. Like,
mhm,
hey, good listeners, they don't talk while other people are talking. You nod and you go, mm-hmm, and you say, you regurgitate what you hear. You rephrase, you paraphrase back what you're hearing. But that doesn't add any depth to the conversation, you know?
no.
Yeah,
I thought we could give our audience today, go back and forth on this. Well, what are some kind of bullet points of good listening benefits? Like, how does it really, okay, Leah, Beth, you're talking about this and it can help us personally and professionally, but what is it that could it really do for us? So, one is
absolutely.
it could lead us to better grades in school or better performance in our job, which leads to improved self-esteem and confidence. So that's one benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, it can help you make friends more easily or build like more meaningful connections in your social network. So if you're being a good listener, you're building a better reputation. You're surrounding yourself with people who have deeper connections.
Yeah, I love that because it builds an element of trust.
Yeah.
Like I can trust that this person is truly listening to me. The other thing, the huge benefit at solving problems, ensuring understanding, and a
Mhm.
big one is resolving conflicts. Because in this human endeavor, we're going to have some conflicts now and then.
You can't avoid it. Though I
Absolutely.
try, you can't avoid conflicts.
I just had an image of an ostrich putting their head in the sand, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, and it can make your children more resilient and resourceful, like raising two kids who can be able to solve their own problems because they're listening to one another. They're not
Mhm.
getting so stuck in their own issues. When my 5-year-old is frustrated because he can't figure out a Lego piece, like right now, he just got a bunch of Legos
Yeah.
and he is all hands on with them and he loves to do it, but he can't read the instructions. He can just follow the pictures. And so when he's getting frustrated, we just tell him, hey, use your words. Like, ask for help, say what are you struggling with, and maybe and his brother's like, oh hey, what's up, how can I help? And it's teaching them to
Mhm.
problem solve on their own and to
Mhm.
ask specifically what they need. I just love seeing it. It's something we definitely need to keep doing throughout their
I,
whole lives.
I that's super cool what you just said because really it sounds like an umbrella of allowing your son to advocate for himself and
Absolutely.
creating a container that is safe for him to advocate. I do that a lot with students in my college course. You know, maybe they're not, you know, they got off to a rough start. But if they will, you know, I create a container for them to advocate for themselves to come to, hey, Professor Wolf, I didn't turn this in, didn't turn that in. I'm like, well, tell me what's going on in your life. What's
Hmm.
going on, and what does it look like for you to actually advocate for yourself? And asking for help, absolutely awesome. And that comes with that
Yeah.
listening. So, the other part of this is building strong relationships, strong marriages. Sometimes developing deeper levels of listening could actually save your marriage.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that I mean, one of the most main common things that go into like marriage therapists when a couple's having a hard time is communication problems, right? It's
Yep.
like it's not necessarily communication, it's listening. It's that part. It's that
Hmm.
section.
Yeah. I've completed a 25-year marriage and went to a lot of counseling and experienced that. It was super helpful to learn those engaging, active listening skills. Um, and our marriage came to a completion, but we did make great progress with that
Yeah.
kind of
Well, and you get to
advice.
go into your next relationships with these
Right.
skills and this
Yeah.
ability.
Absolutely. Add another one. Well, there's even more benefits for good listening. One of them is it can lead to greater productivity with fewer mistakes. And you had a great example of
Absolutely.
that as we were talking. And
Absolutely. And
yeah.
this in the business side of things, when productivity, fewer mistakes, customer service, all of that stuff, the
Mhm.
satisfaction, listening can save you so much time. I had a client a few months back who we met every week, and it felt like every week either they forgot what we had covered or I had forgotten what we had covered, we found ourselves circling back the same stuff. So I was like, nope, I'm going to take notes here. We're going to take notes about what we talked about and covered. We will do like a 2-minute review, but then we need to move on. And it was funny to see them just kind of struggle, feeling like, hey, no, let's go back and talk about this. It's like, no, we don't need to. Let's keep moving forward. And it was hard because there was just not on the same page, and it took longer than it needed to, and it caused so much more stress and anxiety than it
Mm,
should have.
mm. I've had some of those experiences myself, and that's a great summary. Another benefit that is this is it allows you to actually avoid conflict
Mhm.
and misunderstandings with coworkers or clients if you have really high level of skills of good listening.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, and like influencing and persuading, negotiating when it comes to talking to a leader, a manager, a CEO, when you're speaking to someone who you might feel a little intimidated about, this gives you so much more
Hmm.
confidence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then finally, making the sharing of information more effective is actually going to help us lead to a more creative and innovative teamwork. Now you're speaking my language.
Hmm.
If we're in creativity and innovative team, these great listening skills, the benefit of them is if your team is creative and innovative, your productivity is going to go through the roof. And one of my number one values is fun. And then
Yeah,
you're having fun. You're having fun with your coworkers. You're having fun in life. You're having fun at work. How does it get any better than that?
love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of them have a little bit of quote that many successful leaders and entrepreneurs credit their success to their listening skills. And one of a very successful CEO, Richard Branson, for example, he says that frequently points to listening as one of the main factors behind the success of Virgin. So, with that, we're going to go ahead and take a short break, and you're going to want to come back for this next episode because Leah and I are going to be talking about 4 basic goals of listening. And when you know these goals going into a conversation and which one they are, you're going to be developing and up leveling your listening skills. So, come right back after the short break, and we'll go through those with you. Welcome back, everybody, to the second segment on Life in Full Expression with Beth and guest host Leah Thompson. This segment, we're going to be talking about 4 basic goals of listening. And Leah's going to start us off with an
With a
amazing quote by
quote.
Mr. Rogers.
Of course, Mr. Rogers quotes, got them all up my sleeve. So, Mr. Rogers says, in the times of stress, the best thing we can do for each other is to listen with our ears and our hearts, and to be assured that our questions are just as important as our answers.
Mm, it's
I
like
just,
two sides of a coin are both
yes.
important.
They're both important. Well, and when you understand that your questions and, if we listen with the same kind of passion that we
Mhm.
wish that we could be heard, then, I mean, it's just transformative.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. And listening is really the art and science of acknowledging
Hmm.
the value of that very person that you're in presence with. And so, without further ado, what would be 4 ways that you could acknowledge a person? Let's even go to the point that maybe you don't like them. Because,
Oh,
all right, let's look at this some sweaty
yeah.
conversations, a coworker, or in this moment of time you're with your spouse and you're like, I love you, but right now,
Mm.
not, I'm not really liking, what's
Not
going on.
happy with you.
Yeah, yeah. So here's 4 secrets, really strategies, secrets. They're really beautiful strategies. One of the things that I work with my clients is if you're going to enter into a sweaty conversation with someone, and they're possibly not your favorite person in the world. They're not, maybe you both have a perception that it's just not easy to get along with each other. You have very different perspectives, kind of like our last podcast where we talked about you're taking a position and identifying yourself with a position rather than taking a stand. And
Exactly.
yeah, and if you want to know more about that, listen to our
Cool.
last podcast. But these four goals, if you are going into a conversation with someone that is a little bit difficult, are
Mhm.
you going into this conversation with the goal of understanding that person? Are you, well, you wouldn't go into the conversation to enjoy someone, but what if you actually did go into the conversation, even though it was a sweaty one, that
Yeah.
you could actually enjoy that person?
Mhm.
um, Goal number three is you're going into the conversation to learn something, and goal number four is you're going into the conversation to either give help or comfort that person.
Absolutely. And if you go
These
into these conversations with these thoughts, it can help guide how you listen. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. That's spot on. And we go back to making the decision that are you going into this conversation to understand and be interested rather than simply the other side of the coin of being, I want you to understand me, be
Mhm.
understood, and being the interesting one. And when you allow yourself to feel and know and experience both sides of those, that's when you're going to have great success in that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So let's give a little bit of examples of these four different goals. So, for example, um, if you're attending a class or taking an online course, obviously you're going into that to learn something.
Mhm.
And yeah, go ahead, Leah.
Right. Well, and like when it comes to, I imagine the goal of going in to understand something could be when you're in like presenting a proposal in a business meeting. You want to bring questions, and this, and let's say the speaker is proposing something you want to try and understand. So your primary goal for listening is to understand.
Yeah. And that, I think that's a great example too for a sweaty conversation, that you're going in with the intention and the goal to understand this person's particular position, their particular
Hmm.
view, their particular perspective. Um,
Yes.
Goal number three example is if you're meeting a friend and you haven't seen for a while, and you meet at a coffee shop like Leah and I did just
Yeah.
earlier last week, and the main goal is just to enjoy being with a friend and to listen to what's going on.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's your goal right
Absolutely.
there.
And then the last one with giving help or solace, I think that if you know someone, they come to share some like sad news, or something, tragic has happened in their life, or they're going through some hard transitions, your main listening goal is going to be to give help or solace, some comfort.
Yeah. And I'd like us to distinguish a little difference. I think that can be a subcategory. Are you there to give comfort and listen, or are you, as far as giving help? I found as my daughters grew older and now they're 27 and 24, they would come to me and I'd be listening and acknowledging and would ask them right out of the gates, what is it, that you want me to listen for? What is it that you would like out of this conversation? Do you want me to just listen, or are you looking for solutions and help? And that was a game changer because, as my divorce came to a close and a completion, my eldest daughter, they're both very courageous, and my eldest daughter came to me and said, well, Mom, you really don't listen very well. And I was like, oh boy, oh boy,
Hmm.
oh boy,
Ooh,
oh boy.
ouch.
Well, it was a little it was a little bit of an ouch, but it was also like, wow, I thought I was.
Hmm.
As they would come home from school and I would listen to their day and things like that. But it comes back to asking really the right question is, what were they looking for in this conversation? And obviously, without me asking that question, I didn't know what the answer was. And so we sharpened that up and it worked really well by me. Even I'm like, yeah, I am a pretty comprehensive life coach. And they're like, we just want you to turn that off, Mom.
Okay, but I have to applaud you for your ability to listen when they have that feedback. Because, like, I,
Good.
I will tell you, a lot of folks, a lot of parents would probably be on I am a good listener. What are you talking about? That might be their response. And in that case, they're really not being a good listener in that moment.
Not so much. Not so much. I've experienced that with my own parents. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's what really, what we experience, we want to transform and maybe be a more expansive version of that. And bless their hearts, I grew up with parents that just basically shared with me, hey, Beth, it's this way or no way. I don't know why you're trying to think other than this because this is the way it is. And I'm like, but what if it isn't? I would
Yeah.
drive them a little bit crazy. And so I grew up with parents that weren't interested in other perspectives. So that's something that I wanted to give my
Yeah.
kids, have
I
that
could see
experience.
listening being also a superpower for yourself, where it's giving you this moment of pause instead
Mhm.
of reacting right away. And it's going to help you in your relationships. And it did with your daughters. The ability that you
Absolutely.
had to listen to their feedback and not react right away in like a negative way, or to hear them, like you didn't just hear, you listened.
Yeah.
Then you were able to protect your feelings in that relationship with your daughters.
Mhm. And I want to let the listeners know that that didn't happen overnight for me.
No.
It was a skill that I got to develop and practice over and over again, and in many different relationships. So it wasn't just a one-time thing where I came up with this question and it all went beautifully. I just kind of gave the audience the end story. So I
Hmm.
put work into it. I really did. And I thank my daughters for putting work into it as well, for them having the courage to speak.
Yes, and the
Yeah.
courage to listen.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about other kinds of listening skills and these goals. I want to talk a little bit about in business, and both you and I are part of Chamber and BNI. What does it look like for us to be? What kind of goal are we setting forth when we're in those kind of listening and conversations?
Well, I think a lot of the times you've got to kind of turn off the ego a little bit of like, how can I
Mm,
be front and center, or how can I give space? Because you and I are in this BNI, and a lot of it is this give and take. And that rapport is really critical in business. You have to have that built trust of, they're going to give me my time, I'm going to give them their time. And so that's where active listening can really be at your benefit. Because if you are providing that service to others by listening, then in turn they should be providing that back, right? It's sort of
yeah,
that give and take.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that you bring that up. I mean, one of the great things just for BNI is using our gains profile, and it's an
Hmm.
acronym for goals, accomplishments, interests. Um, but that is, it comes down to getting to know each other's interests,
Hmm.
not just goals, not just achievements, but that we've got an active listening going and putting our ears in. And
Right,
then
and
there's a
setting a
different,
goal.
yeah, absolutely, because we're on a team of marketing for each other and putting out their services for each other as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Anything else you want to add to those four goals? Again, number one,
No.
to understand someone, to enjoy someone, to learn something, or to give help and solace. Those four goals.
Yeah, I think it's also great you brought up asking your daughters. So I don't know, like going into a conversation, asking and having a goal when you come to listening is
Yeah,
so important.
yeah, absolutely. I would have loved to had these skill sets when I was a teenager,
Hmm.
early, like a young employee.
Hmm.
I would have loved to have had those. And I want to put it out there to the listeners. I've worked a lot with businesses, and sometimes employees feel like the employer should provide everything for them to be successful.
Yeah.
And I would just open up that the more you can make yourself valuable, um, you're going to be irreplaceable to a certain extent. But just the fact that you're bringing value to that company, um, good listening skills and having those develop is going to be a game changer, because you're going to change the very culture that you're working in for that company, and that's very, very important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, there we go. So, in a nutshell, we want to set the intention. I am a proponent of asking high calibrating questions. And I just want to put out there as we bring this segment into a close that if we are asking high calibrating questions that are coming from solutions, one of the ways that you can really kind of pop a balloon in that and it not be very effective is when you're asking people why they do what they do. In some realms, that can actually create a defensiveness in people, and you
Mhm.
take away the open, engaging conversation. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
100%. It's a loaded question.
It is. It is because you're really asking people to defend their point of view, their
Mhm.
perspective, and it's almost like you're creating them to be trenched into it even more
Mhm.
versus asking a question that might be a what or a how or a
Mhm.
when.
Yeah, or pulling in some personal perspective of like, hey, like when I first met you, it's like I don't know much about life coaches. Can you tell me about that process? And just
Hmm.
kind of leading into it of asking more specific questions about what someone does in their business or what they're hoping to get out of it. Maybe some specific struggles or goals that they have, rather than overarching, why do you do what you do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and take a short break. And
Okay.
when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about what good listening is not
Mm.
and have a little bit of that because it's nice to see the other side of the coin of what is it not and what is it. And so we'll take a short break and be back after this short commercial. Welcome back to this last segment of Life in Full Expression. Today, we're talking about elements of the power of listening. And as we come into this last segment, Leah and I are going to touch on a few things, a little bit more of what good listening is not. And we're going to bring in a little bit of some two strategies for levels of listening. And then we'll bring it in for a landing. But do you have another quote for us, Leah?
Let's see if we've got one more quote. Is it okay that it's another Mr. Rogers quote?
It's okay with me. I mean, the man
I
has so
mean,
much wisdom.
he's got so much wisdom here. So, listening is a very active awareness of the coming together of at least two lives. Listening, as far as I'm concerned, is certainly a prerequisite of love.
Ooh,
Mm. And I
I
mean, I know we're not
love
talking no, so
that.
much about love in this one. It's very, I mean, we could discuss it in personal and business, but
Right.
it's that caring for one another. It's that
Yeah.
human connection.
Yeah.
That's how I take that.
Absolutely. That is gorgeous. That's a drop the mic, Mr.
Drop the
Rogers.
mic, Mr. Rogers. I
Yeah.
love that. Yes, because it
Just
is. Because it is. I love that he says it's an active awareness, and
yeah.
it's understanding that when you're talking or when you're listening and you're in
Mhm.
communication, it's not one-sided, and you're not thinking of just yourself. You're engaged
Yeah.
together in two people, and two people, as we've talked about, who have different perspectives, and that implementing those 4 strategies
Mhm.
of listening that you mentioned, whether it's to help and solace, enjoy,
Mhm.
understand, or learn.
Right, right. And you can always in the conversation it's okay that there's wobbles in it. I
Mhm,
That's something that I have in my relationship with Kelly. It's like we're going to have wins and wobbles.
mhm.
And if we just know they're going to be there in these conversations, it's okay that they don't go exactly, maybe how you perceive them to go. But know that you've got the skills to navigate with the wobbles. And another one of my favorite
Yeah.
quotes that I've learned is, you don't become a skilled sailor in calm seas. So
Mm,
you don't want to be out in the storm all the time, but you definitely get to develop great skills with that. So, first
100%.
listening is not the same as hearing. This is a key point that hearing is actually a physical process provided that you don't necessarily have hearing problems that occur naturally. Um, but listening is much more active and it requires both hearing and processing what you hear. And I love this aspect of it for us to have the awareness that listening actually takes focus and effort,
Yes,
which is
this
an
is why
act
it's
of
something
love.
you have to improve, and it is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
Hearing is, like you said, it's a physical process that we naturally come to unless we have hearing problems, but listening is a skill to.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a question for us as well. Why do you think that people really don't even think about improving their listening skills? Any thoughts on
I
that?
mean, I would say they're just not aware of it. Like maybe they just don't know that they're not good at listening. I've come across people who are just, hey, I am a great listener, but they also talk over or they interrupt. And unfortunately, like character wise, I do that when I'm enthusiastic about a topic. I'll be like, oh, yeah, I'll jump into it before. So when I go into it intentionally wanting to connect though, where it's like, hey, we're having a conversation. I want to listen. I want to be a good listener. But it requires that skill. But if you don't know it, you just might think you're a really good listener, but you're not.
Yeah, yeah. And here is we're going to introduce two levels of six, but you're at the first level of listening if you are already doing this. And so you're at level 1 out of 6, and that is not talking when others speaking. You're at
Mhm.
level 1. Level another part of level 1. Go ahead and give this one, Leah.
Well, I mean, letting others know that you're listening through like what we were talking about, facial expression or going, yeah, I think that these are basic things they teach you for, hey, be a good listener. Don't talk, make eye contact, go, yeah, and then
Yeah.
paraphrase. The last part is to paraphrase back, right?
Yeah, exactly. So those are level 1 listening skills is you're not talking when other people are speaking. You're
Yeah.
giving facial expressions, giving a little nod of the head, and adding in a little fun thing. When I lived in India for a while, the in India they would kind of wobble their head, and you're like, is that a yes or is that a no? What is that? And
Hmm.
it was really actually yes, that it was this little, like, almost like a figure eight that they were going in, of an infinity sign with their head. And it just shows you too that in different cultures it can mean a lot of different things, and for us to have an awareness of that as well, that
Absolutely.
it's not just American culture, that's for sure. We're in a global culture. So
Yeah.
that's
And those
level
can
one.
feel, I mean, and it's something that is the most basic form of listening. And there's like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that being the starting place. Maybe if you stink at not talking when others are talking, then start there, practice with that. There's
Ooh, I
nothing
like
wrong
that.
with that. But I just think it's very mechanical. It's just very dry. And when you do those things and you say, I'm a good listener because I do these three things, it's just you're missing out on the connection part of it.
I love that when we were prepping and you said that out loud, that it becomes mechanical, almost like a rote knowledge. Like you don't
Mhm.
really have the deeper meaning of it. And I loved it when you said it's mechanical, which means we're really not having that deep connection and engagement. That's super,
Exactly.
super cool. So there's 3 moves. These are 3 moves. They're great moves. I love what Leah mentioned. If you notice and are starting to have an awareness that you talk over people when they're talking, that's a great place to start. One of my mentors says that if you notice what you're noticing, that is the beginning of awareness. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Love
Well,
that.
let's talk a little bit about some research that we have for our audience from some amazing development coaches in this. Jack and Joseph, they're leadership development consultants on good listening. And they say that listening is much more than just being silent while the speaker is talking, which
Mm,
we've spoke of that.
absolutely. And it includes interactions that build the speaker's self-esteem, which I wanted to applaud you, Beth, because you are extravagant at this. You make every person who you speak to when you're listening, not only do you paraphrase, you don't paraphrase, you make that person feel like they literally just like they're the most wise person that you've ever spoken with. You have this ability of boosting confidence as someone who doesn't feel very comfortable always talking all the time. I prefer to listen. You are very great at encouraging someone to open up and speak. And I think that comes from the self-esteem that we talked about kind of earlier.
Yeah, well, thank you. I love creating an energetic space where people feel elevated and increased and edified and acknowledged in conversations. It it gives me great joy, and I love to see them light up. And then that actually creates an energy that they feel an increased desire and even safety to share even more.
Mm,
And then I get to know more about the person, and I
right.
really, really love that. So, also, good
Mm.
listening is about creating a two-sided cooperative conversation. And I'm even learning that in this podcast with you, because a lot of time I've been doing the podcast by myself and then having you on there. This helps me sharpen my skill in that area.
You never know what is gonna land. I love how you say download. Like when you're
Yeah.
speaking with someone, what's going to land inside you, what's going to speak in your soul, things come up, creative juices flow. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think like what the last thing here for good listening, it includes helpful suggestions from the listener. And this makes me think of in improv when you're working with people, the only way to keep it flowing is to say yes and. So you take what that person's saying, and instead of regurgitating back, like reiterating back what they said, you just say yes and you add to it and you keep going
Mhm.
with it. And that's how a listener can bring helpful suggestions.
I love that when you brought that up as we were prepping here. That's a major skill set that I bring in my coaching with my clients and consulting with them. And I actually, in the 3 years of training that I had in life coaching, and still because I'm breathing, so I'm still in training. But we actually had these improv comedians come in and do a workshop with
Mm,
us. And you brought up a really cool word in the sentence that you just said, that the yes and helps us stay in the flow.
mhm.
And that was so interesting to do improv because we were staying in this flow. And they even had an exercise, I'm recalling it right now, of where we got in certain hand gestures and then we had to copy them and then make a new one. And then some, it was like a 3D twister type
Oh, cool.
improv. It was super cool.
Yeah.
And we're in the flow. I
Mhm.
love that. So, if we could add another goal in there of what Leah and I just are talking about, that the goal of active and engaging listening would be, well, what if we were in a flow?
Yeah,
Yeah, that brings up incredible innovation and creativity. Yeah,
I
I
love
love
that.
that.
Yes.
Super cool. Well, we have a little bit more about research showing four main findings that you guys can actually, let's say that, well, I'd like to maybe measure a little bit of my listening skills. And so there was another research that was measuring these, and they had four main findings. Start us off with that number one finding,
Yeah,
Leah.
so number one, good listening is much more than being silent while the other person talks. Rather, it's those who periodically ask questions that promote discovery and insight. This challenges old assumptions in a constructive way. Incredible, because that at this time when you're like you were talking sweaty conversations,
Mhm.
conflict, anything like that, this is rather than being silent and sitting there and listening to the conflict, you can ask questions and you can I love the discovery and insight that you're
Mhm.
inviting through that.
Absolutely. Here's a little skill set that you could put into this as you're entering into maybe a sweaty conversation, a difficult one, a person that has really high emotions. And if you're interested more in that, the listeners in here, again, there's a great course in my online Platinum Life University called The Power of Listening. And it's as you go into this conversation of just asking the permission, would it be okay if I ask some clarification questions?
Mhm.
So you both are on the same page of like, well, yes, so that the person doesn't feel like they're being interrupted.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Another main finding was good listening included interactions that build a person's self esteem. So, what if that is your intention going into a conversation, is that it is all about building that person's self esteem? Who wouldn't want to be in a conversation with you to solve maybe some difficult problems?
Some difficult problems if you kind of boost up their morale there. Love that.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So then do you want me to go into the next
Yeah,
one?
go for
All
the
right.
third one.
Next one is good listening was seen as a cooperative conversation. So we kind of talked about this cooperative conversation, feedback, and that flow, both directions. So kind of trying to prevent that defensive feeling
Yep.
about comments, and I think that that can be something where you listen and you listen to the end rather than cutting off and making assumptions.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you ever heard assumptions at times called ass
You make
assumptions.
an ass out of you and me. You've heard that
Yeah,
one?
yeah, yeah. That I've played in that hallway several times in
Uh,
my life. Absolutely. And then the last main thing is good listeners tend to make suggestions. Again, setting that intention as you go into a conversation. Would it be okay with you that we both ask questions? Would it be okay if we both make suggestions? Because now you're not being just a passive listener, you're being active, engaging, and effective.
Absolutely. Love
Yeah.
that.
Really talking about the art and science of being an engaged, active listener. So, why
hmm
don't you share with the listeners this exercise that they could
Cool.
do?
Absolutely. So, for listeners here, we can think about all of the people. If you could think about all of the people in your life with whom you've had conversations, I want you to picture some of those conversations when you felt that you really deeply listened to, and identify the person. If you had to pick just one, who you feel is the best listener you've ever known, and describe one of the conversations you recall having with this person and why you think the person demonstrated great listening skills in the situation, and just kind of like hold that image of a great
Mhm.
listener in your mind. And then what are the traits of this great listener? Um, yeah, so think about that.
Yeah, that's a great exercise.
Yeah.
Just allowing yourself to marinate in
Yeah.
that experience.
I think that's why I
Um,
like Mr. Rogers so much, is that's the
mhm.
person I think about. He had a television show and he was by himself most of the time, and he
Yeah,
managed to be a good listener even though he was the host of the show. Like, such a good listener, and he portrayed that in how he interacted with others.
absolutely. I love that. Well, as promised, Leah and I wanted to share with you two of the six levels of listening skills. And so the first level I'm going to share with you, and then Leah's going to do the second one. But the first level is creating a safe environment in which the conversation can take place. So sometimes when we're unaware, we might want to feel a rather impulse to have a conversation when maybe it's not the appropriate time, it's not the
Mhm.
appropriate place. Um, this takes conscious awareness to take that you're going to actually create a safe environment which difficult complex emotional issues can be discussed, and you're going to keep in mind what's the listening goal for this particular level. So how about level two
Absolutely.
for the
Level
listeners?
2, so clearing away distractions and focusing full attention on your speaker. This means, reevaluate looking at your phone. Put your phone away. Put down your laptop. Focus your attention on the other person, and making appropriate eye contact with it. Doesn't mean like you have to stare at them the whole time unblinking. It means we're going to make appropriate eye contact. And this affects how the speaker is being perceived by the listener. If you are looking at your phone or looking away or clearly distracted, the speaker doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel like they're being listened to, and instantly that attitude can change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it takes away the value of the person in the conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, here's a little sneak preview of the other levels. It's about understanding the speaker's verbal communication, their nonverbal communication, empathizing with the speaker's feelings, and asking questions and sharing thoughts. The power of listening is a skill that you can develop. And if you want to know more about this, again, I'll put a link in this post, as well as you can go to bethwolfe.com and find the power of listening, and you can develop your skills. So, Leah, thank you for joining me on
Thank you,
Life in
Beth.
Full Expression. Always wonderful to have you. And again, I challenge everybody, keep up those high calibrating questions to get high calibrating solutions. Have a great week. All right, take
Thank
care, you
you.
guys. See you then. Thanks for tuning in to Life in Full Expression with me, Beth Wolfe. Tune in each Monday at noon Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern on transformationtalkradio.com. Be your most elevated self and pursue a path of fulfillment, clarity, expansion, fun, and living your best life. If you would like to discover the 7 dimensions of your life blueprint of expression, to fully express yourself, reveal your heart's clarity for dynamic direction, and activate your unique capability, visit BethWolfe.com. That's Beth, WOLFE.com.